Welcome to the Breakfast Leadership Show, where we interview global thought leaders on business, leadership, and life. Here's your host, keynote speaker, best-selling author, and chief burnout officer of the Breakfast Leadership Network, Michael Levitt.
Welcome back. I've got Steve Legler on the line. Steve, how are you?
I'm great. How's it going with you?
Things are good. Life is good. Even in the new year and everything that's going on in the world, I can't complain. I'm healthy. I'm vertical. That's a good thing. So share with the audience a little bit about the work you do and a little bit about you.
Okay. I'm based in Montreal, but these days it doesn't really matter where people are based. And I think we've learned a lot about that in the last year or so, that it makes sense to kind of deal with people wherever they are, because we can do a lot that way. I call myself a family legacy guide. I used to call myself a family legacy advisor, a family business consultant, a family business coach. So I work in that area with people who have created a business and maybe they're at that stage where they're the first generation and they're figuring out how they're going to leave this to the next generation, how they're going to involve them. And it's not always easy for them to figure out how to have those important conversations between generations. And sometimes actually with sibling groups they know they're going to be inheriting something, having those conversations amongst themselves. So I'm kind of a specialist in that, working with people who are in these situations where there's some family assets that are expected to go through some kind of intergenerational transition in the next little while, and to help them figure out how they're going to do that. Now, the people go to their lawyers and they go to their accountants to have things drawn up to save taxes and officialize things. But I work more with, like, how are we going to work together? How are we going to make decisions together? All that stuff that isn't always as obvious. Where do you go to get help with this kind of stuff?
It's critical, and I've seen so many stories, and obviously I shared in the pre-show, commentary about some challenges that my mom had to deal with passing of her sister a few years ago in the estate. And yes, there was a will, and it was clearly laid out, but then there was an amendment to the will that was handwritten by my aunt that muddied the waters a little bit, and it really created a lot of dynamics and challenges with siblings and of both my uncle and on my mom's side as well. Thankfully, I wasn't involved in it. I wasn't in the will, so I had no say in the matter on anything. But it was still, I looked at it as an opportunity. And my brother and I, being the only siblings of our parents, we've had the conversations already, years ago of, okay, well, how do we want this to play out? And we know the what's in the will and all that. And really quick side story on this, and I think you'll appreciate this. For years, my parents had a will, and when my brother and I were younger, it was basically laid out that if something happened to the both of my parents, that my brother and I would have to live with my uncle.
Right.
Now, my uncle passed away in 2002. And my parents had not updated the will up until probably about 5 years ago. So, we're doing all this stuff, and, we commented to them, and we kind of enticed them to update it, was, okay, if something should happen to the two of you now, according to the will, we got to live with Uncle Joe. And knowing how he behaved in life, I'm not sure we want to go visit and live with Uncle Joe. Love you, Uncle Joe. If you're watching and, the afterworld, I love you. We're just poking fun at you. But I was like, we don't want to do that if we could avoid that if possible. So, now, we got the new will and I verified, nope, don't have to live with him. Yeah, that's good. We got that covered. But it's one of those things where, yes, you said, the legal side of things and the accountants and making sure, it minimizes estate taxes and all that fun stuff is good. But the actual dynamics of talking amongst yourself so that everyone is aware of what happens. So when a loved one does pass, then you don't have the mourning situation coupled with chaos of, right, okay, who's getting what and how and when and all of that kind of stuff. So it's amazing that you do that work. So, I'm sure that you have a ton of horror stories of what you've seen before and how people can avoid those things.
Yeah, well, so that's you bring up a lot of interesting things. Like, you don't want to have the uncertainty compounded with the mourning, right? You don't want to have people that all of a sudden they're mourning the loss of someone, and then they have all this confusion about what's supposed to happen, or, hey, I thought it was supposed to be like this. So, like, clearly the best situations are the ones where the family has had not just a discussion, but a series of open discussions over a period of years where they've talked about what do they want to have happen. Now, what often happens is the parents say, okay, I want this person to get this, and this person should take over the company and all that. And then they go to their lawyer and they have it all written up, and then they keep it a secret. And then they don't tell their kids. And then the kids find out and get a surprise after. And so I understand that it's like a first instinct is to go to the lawyer to write things up or do that. But I always regret walking into situations where everything has been set up by one generation as a fait accompli, and they have not even involved or asked or shared anything with the ones after them. And I understand it's not easy, because you don't want to talk about it because you're talking about death, and you don't want to create some kind of like animosity between one or the other. But personally, if I were going to leave something unbalanced to my kids, I would want to clarify why I'm doing it while I'm still here, so that I can still answer the questions as to why I did that. And that's part of the problem, is people have this keeping their cards close to the vest attitude about things, and especially in a family business where there's a considerable amount of wealth and some complexity about how different assets, if there's a business or there's some real estate, how are these things going to be managed? Who's going to make the decisions? All these things need to be discussed with all the people at the proper time, and not when, dad's in the hospital and you're not sure if he's going to make it.
There was a movie that came out last year called Knives Out, and I'm not going to spoil it for people, but that's an entertaining movie. It's got a lot of twists and turns in the end of it. Not spoiling it for anybody, but it was like, wow, I didn't see that coming. But again, it was, you saw the family dynamics of, a parent dying, very affluent family, and everyone's trying to figure out who's getting what, and they're all getting in line and saying, well, I should get this because of this, and you get all those things. And if the person that passed would have clearly laid it out and said, here's how it goes, they would have been mad and bickering and all that stuff, but everyone would have known, and it completely diminished the period of time of the loss, and then everything else that's in the movie. And again, not wanting to spoil it, but that's one of those insane examples that might be more often a lot of what a lot of families face when they deal with something like this, because of the complete confusion. Going, wait a minute, I'm a caregiver for dad, and now I should get more of it because I had to give up so much of my life for that. And, that may have been in the will and may not have been, and who knows, in conversations and all that stuff. So it's, if anybody takes anything away from this conversation, it's like, have those conversations, get it laid out. Yes, it's not a comfortable conversation, but you know what? If there is assets to be shared and passed on to another generation, that's a gift. It really is. It's a gift. So
and you can almost ruin it by not doing it the right way. At the end of the day, you're setting up a situation where maybe you're creating a conflict that didn't have to be there. But you're talking about a movie. That there's a TV show called Succession that's won a lot of Emmys and stuff, and it is a classic case of how not to do things, right? So the guy tells basically each of his kids that, you're the one that I want to take over. And then so they start, fighting each other for things, which is crazy. It's really well acted and all that. And I suppose it's realistic for some families that go about it that way. But I always say, yes, watch it for the entertainment, but don't watch it as like a how to do things, because it's actually the opposite of that.
Yeah. Do not emulate behaviors of bad families that, have affluent lives, and they do some insane things. That's not what normal looks like, and don't try to emulate that, because unfortunately, there are families, I've seen them personally, that behave on that dynamic. And good childhood friend of mine, I saw that with his family at an early age, and I thought, wow, this family has some dysfunction to it, because there was a competition. Everyone was basically counting down the clock when the dad was going to pass, and who would take ownership of the business and who would run it, and all these other things. And you finally had one of the kids just like, I don't care. I'm out of this. Leave me the heck out of it. I don't want to deal anything with it. And, they had a rightful stake in things, but they went, I don't want to deal with this nightmare. So they walked away from, whatever that business ended up being worth. And I know the family ended up selling it years later. And, I don't think that my friend was able to get anything of it because he walked away from it. But I think from a peace of mind standpoint, I think it was a big decision for him. Yeah, it's sometimes you have to pull the plug and do those things. But again, so what are some common things you walk people through in this exercise? Because I'm guessing that they're thinking, as we've talked about before, the legal side of things and the the bean counter side of things. But what are some common things that they don't necessarily recognize when they're going through these discussions?
Well, it's different for every family, obviously, but a lot of things repeat. And I think one of the things I can offer to families is to be that, what I like to say sometimes is that person with a different last name around that won't talk about. And so having someone to be able to sort of hold a container, ask the right questions, get them to talk about these things. So it's simple things like, how are the siblings going to make decisions together after the parents are gone? How are you going to communicate? How are you going to solve problems together? And the best thing that I like to do is to work with a sibling group, typically for a while, to get them to do things together, to get them to put on a family weekend, to get them working together, to practice working together, so that they know that they can work together and that they can learn to sort of work out all the little differences in that, oh yeah, my brother, I always got to email him twice. Or my sister, well, I usually have to text her. Like just the small little working things about knowing how to communicate together. Who's better at what? Who takes on certain roles? Who can take charge of things? Who's a good follower? Who are the people that you really can't rely on, unfortunately? And so you need to make sure that the stuff that was assigned to that person, you need to take care of. If they can get used to those things on less critical decisions while everyone's around, all that work and practice will serve them in good stead later on when there are bigger decisions. Gee, dad died and now the company's worth this, and now we have to decide about this. How are we going to make this decision? And something that happened last year with the pandemic is a lot of businesses owned by families got thrown for a loop about, okay, all of a sudden we're on lockdown or this or that. And the family governance, as we like to call it, but I really don't love that word because families don't really gravitate towards, oh yeah, let's create some governance. But it really is what they are creating. But people's family governance got tested in a lot of families because all of a sudden there was a shutdown, or they had to do this. They had to decide whether to keep paying employees, all these different decisions. And some families who had already gone through and taken care of some of these questions about how are we going to decide, they got through this a lot better. There's some families that didn't really have a lot of governance work pre-done, and they realized, holy crap, hey, we got to go figure this stuff out because my sister did something that she thought she was in her full right to do, but really, I thought that if we had a decision like that, the whole family would have been consulted. So they really need to work together to practice doing this while mom and dad are still around, so that after mom and dad are no longer around, they've already sort of paved the way to figuring these things out and how they're gonna live together, how are they gonna work together.
It almost mimics a board of directors type of meeting where you got to have governance and what are the bylaws and who's the president, who's the treasurer, and who's doing what kind of thing. And again, a lot of I'm sure there's some initial resistance to people because it's, in a way, it can be uncomfortable. But again, for businesses, yeah, it should be clearly laid out, because otherwise you have dynamics where, you have, like you've alluded to before, there's conversations like that television show. Yeah, you're gonna get the most of it, and they keep having those same conversations with everybody else. So everybody's like, "Well, I'm getting most of it," and then they realize, "Oh, wait a minute, no, you're all getting 20% of it across the board," and everyone's like, "No, that's not right," and you have the infighting coming in, and it's just an absolute nightmare to deal with.
So, Michael, your point about the board of directors is a good one, because that's the decision-making body for the business. What we're talking about now is creating like a family council, which is what it's typically called, which is the decision-making body for the family aspect. And most family, like, it takes a while to get to that. You don't decide, okay, geez, I started a business and I got kids, I better create a family council. But once there's another generation that's involved, and whether they're employees or owners or not, or they're just family members that are stakeholders, somehow you need to start to create the kind of forum where those stakeholders have a place where they can share information, where they can learn, and where they can learn how they have an impact or not, or just to understand what's going on and to converse and deal with what they will eventually be owning or controlling. And it's never too early to get them involved. People always ask, so at what age should you share this information? And wealthy families are always, oh my God, we don't want to tell the kids how rich we are, because if they know they're rich, they won't finish school and they won't get a job because they'll think they can. And that's a parenting issue. If you're worried about that, it's not because of the amount of money. It's because you haven't been preparing the kids properly. And I know plenty of families that are worth a lot of money, and their kids are the smartest ones in school and they're the hardest working, and they are not entitled at all. So the idea of getting the kids engaged, getting them interested, getting them involved in some way so they can feel part of it, that brings them into the family to want to build the legacy, so that they're still involved because they've understood it and they've been involved from a very young age, and want to continue this into the next generation, and want to then continue to build what was already there and to be stewards of the family's wealth for the next generation that's going to follow them.
It's so important, and the lessons that they, with the family council and all of those things. And I love how you said the parenting side of things, because sometimes those blend. They think that the business side of things is also the raising the kids kind of thing, and it's a separate thing. Yes, it involves the same players, but it's definitely a separate entity that should be addressed accordingly and not blended in so much, because family dynamics can be challenging. Even the healthiest of families have their challenges. And when you throw a business into it and financial aspects of it, it can really get mucky, and it just makes for a big mess unless you clearly have some boundaries and defined entities and who's going to be doing what. And unfortunately, I see with so many entrepreneurs, they don't think about that. It's not top of mind at all.
They're busy building their business, and they didn't necessarily build this business to become a huge family business and create a lot of wealth. They built it because they were good at something, and they caught lightning in a bottle and they went with it. And then all of a sudden, oh my God, I'm worth a lot of money. Oh my God, I got these kids. Oh my God. And it's like, should I stop building it to sort of concentrate on the kids? No, it's more fun to keep building it. And a lot of people joke that the business is actually the favorite child, or the third child of if they have two kids. And so it's not something that people set out to do, right? And so, like, I wrote a book a few years ago called Shift Your Family Business, where the whole point was to shift from trying to make the pie bigger, and to shift, instead of working on the family business, instead to work. The subtitle was, now, geez, when you got two books, you're going back to the one from a few years ago. You start to mix them up. So it's stop working in your family business. Start working on your business family. So it's the working in and working on, but also switching the focus from the business to the family. I wrote that for people like my dad, who had started a business, and grown it, and my father-in-law, and they get to the point where, their kids are, into their 20s and stuff. And now I really got to stop working on making this pie bigger and instead start to figure out how are we going to share this pie? How is this going to work with people coming behind? And so it's a mental shift to actually get out of the, there's something more important than working on what I've created. I've created it. Now, how do I create a really good family to keep the business going after I'm gone?
That's critical. And obviously I want to make sure that I share the links to your books in the notes. But I've loved this conversation. Where can people find out more about you and this incredible work you're doing?
The good news that I have is my name is easy to say and spell, Steve Legler. There's only one vowel. It's an E. It repeats a few times, and yet it's not very common. So if you just Google Steve Legler, if you add family business, for sure you're going to find me. My website is actually stevelegler.com. So I'm pretty easy to find. I'm on LinkedIn. I'd love to hook up with other professionals who deal with the kind of families that we've been talking about. The other thing here is the kind of families I'm talking about, they're not always that easy to reach, but the people who serve them, they are always looking for other people who can help them when they have a family. That if you're a financial advisor and you have a family worth a certain, and you start to hear about their things with their family, you want to help, but maybe it's not your skill set. Maybe you don't know how you even want to get paid. You're going to get paid for that, and you don't want to kick a hornet's nest. If you can bring someone in who has that, what we call interdisciplinary fluency. I understand the accounting, I understand the finance, I understand the psychological part, and can put that all together and concentrate more on the family aspect of things. So Steve Legler, just the way it sounds, Legler. Always happy to talk to people from family businesses or people who work with family businesses or wealthy families, especially when there's an upcoming transition from one generation to the next, even if it's not, imminent, but like even 10 years before, they should be starting to have these conversations. And they're conversations that don't typically happen by themselves, and they're easy to kick the can down the road. So.
Well, that's great. And I'll definitely have that in the show notes. And I highly encourage every entrepreneur, every business owner, reach out to you because it's critical work. You don't want your business when you pass to end up in the hands of somebody besides who you want it to go to. If you want it to go to your family, then get that clearly laid out and communicated with everybody. So when that time comes, when you pass, you know that the business will be handled the way that you want to have it handled, and everyone will know all of that information. So the work you do, Steve, is absolutely amazing. So thank you so much for that and for being on the show.
All right. Thanks, Michael. It's been great. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Breakfast Leadership Show, part of the Breakfast Leadership Network. Visit breakfastleadership.com for tips on empowering your business and your life.